The sun was sinking low over the quiet street, casting long shadows across my front porch when I heard Miles's car in the driveway. He hadn't said he was coming by. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, expecting him to step in alone like he usually did. Instead, he opened the door with a flourish, as though unveiling a surprise. "Mom, this is Serena," he said, the warmth in his voice leaving no room for hesitation. She stepped past him with a smile that was all teeth and calculation, extending her hand as if this were a business introduction. Serena was striking polished hair, tasteful makeup, an air of someone who never arrived anywhere without a plan. Her eyes moved over the living room in quick, deliberate sweeps, lingering on the details, the antique bookshelf my father built, the framed photographs on the mantel, the rug that had been here since before Miles was born. I saw it, the quick tightening of her lips, the faint curl at one corner, almost like a private joke. She made a slow circuit of the room, complimenting the charming vintage feel while her gaze flicked between objects, measuring them as if she were already deciding what stayed and what went, when her hand reached out to a photo of Miles in his Little League uniform. She turned it slightly, angling it toward the window. "Better light," she said, not asking. Miles grinned at her like she'd just done something thoughtful. I stayed still, my fingers curling against my palm. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't want to. They sat on the couch, Serena crossing her legs neatly, her voice flowing like warm honey as she told me how they'd met, how she was so excited to spend more time here. I made tea out of habit, placing the cups on the coffee table between us. Serena thanked me, her eyes still moving past me, past this moment, already picturing something else entirely. By the time they left that night, I knew this visit wasn't an introduction. It was an arrival. After they left, I walked into the kitchen and let my hand rest on the worn oak counter. My father built it himself, sanding the edges until they were smooth enough that I never caught a splinter, no matter how many hours I spent perched there as a girl. This house had always been more than wood and nails. It was the sum of a lifetime's worth of care. When my parents passed within a year of each other, the deed went directly to me. There was never any question, even when my husband, Richard, and I took on the renovations, new plumbing, fresh paint, the porch rebuilt after a storm. The papers stayed in my name. Richard never minded. "Your family's home," he'd say, tightening the last screw on the kitchen cabinets. "I'm just here to help you keep it standing." Then Richard was gone too, a heart attack stealing him before he saw Miles finish high school. I remember standing in the hallway that day, staring at the photographs lining the wall, Richard holding a toddler, Miles in the backyard, my parents waving from the porch, my own wedding picture, faded at the edges. I realized then that the only constant in my life was this place. Every corner tells a story. The dent in the banister from the time Miles tried to slide down it with a pillowcase cape. The garden bed my mother planted with roses she swore would bloom forever. The creak in the third stair that Richard promised he'd fix one of these days. Before they passed, my parents told me more than once, "Protect what's yours, because no one else will." I thought they meant the property taxes, the upkeep, the bills. Now I'm beginning to wonder if they meant something more. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark for a moment, hearing the faint echo of their voices in my mind, somewhere upstairs. In the quiet, I could almost hear the house breathing, as if it knew it might soon be tested again. The next time Miles brought Serena over, she arrived carrying a reusable tote bag filled with groceries. I thought it was a kind gesture until she began unloading them directly into my pantry, moving my own staples aside without so much as a glance in my direction. "Some of these things are past their prime," she said lightly, holding up a perfectly fine box of pasta before dropping it in the trash. I brought quinoa and sprouted bread, healthier options for all of us. I bit back the urge to point out that all of us hadn't asked for her health plan. Instead, I made a mental note and kept my tone neutral the next week. My favorite set of cotton dish towels, the ones with faded sunflowers my mother embroidered, were gone. In their place hung crisp, white, organic cotton towels with a little designer tag at the corner. Serena beamed when she saw me notice. A little upgrade. You'll thank me. It didn't stop there. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find the armchair angled toward the window instead of the fireplace. Better flow, she explained, as if the house had been waiting decades for her to show it how to breathe. Miles just grinned, telling me Serena had an eye for these things and that I should let her help. Help. That was the word he kept using, as if her rearranging my life was some charitable act. The first time she brought her children, Lila and Cohen. I tried to welcome them. Within 10 minutes, they'd vanished upstairs. I found them in my craft room, pulling open drawers, spilling buttons across the floor. Lila held a pair of antique sewing shears in one hand. "Sweetheart, those aren't toys," I said, stepping forward before I could take them. Serena appeared in the doorway, smiling. "They're just curious. They've never had a space like this to explore." I knelt to gather the scattered buttons, hearing them clink against the jar like tiny warnings. I told myself I'd lock the door next time. But I knew it wasn't just the craft room I needed to guard. It was the quiet certainty building inside me that Serena Vale wasn't here to visit. She was here to stay. It was a Saturday morning when Lila wandered into the kitchen. Her hair still mussed from sleep. She sat at the table with a bowl of cereal and studied me for a long moment before speaking. "Mommy says you're old-fashioned," she said matter-of-factly. "And when she and Miles get married, he's going to modernize the house." The spoon paused halfway to my mouth. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice even. She nodded, taking another bite like she'd simply passed along the weather report. Before I could decide whether to respond, a sharp crash echoed from the living room. I set my coffee down and hurried in to find Cohen, standing over the shattered remains of a porcelain figurine, one of my mother's, kept safe on the mantel for decades. His eyes were wide, but there was no fear in them. "It fell," he said. I glanced toward the mantel. It was too high for a 6-year-old to reach without climbing. The faint scuff marks on the side table told me exactly how it happened. Serena breezed in a moment later, her voice coated in sugar. "Oh, kids will be kids," she laughed, crouching to ruffle Cohen's hair. "He didn't mean to. These things happen." I knelt, gathering the pieces carefully, my fingers brushing over the smooth porcelain that had survived 3 generations only to be lost in an instant. That evening, I told Miles about it, about Lila's comment, about the figurine. His expression tightened, but not with the anger I expected. "Mom, Serena's just trying to fit in," he said. "You're reading too much into things. The kids are adjusting. It's a big change for them, too." I stared at him, wondering when he had started defending them over me without hesitation. After that, Serena stopped pretending to ask before making changes. New curtains appeared in the living room without discussion. My spice rack was rearranged completely. A throw blanket I'd had since college vanished, replaced by one that matched her aesthetic. Each change was small enough to dismiss on its own, but together, they were beginning to feel like something else entirely. And I could see, piece by piece, how my home was becoming less mine and more hers. Miles invited me to dinner at the house one Sunday evening. It was unusual. He rarely suggested we all sit down together, but I agreed, curious, when I walked into the dining room. Serena was already seated at the head of the table, her posture perfect, a faint flush on her cheeks like she'd been rehearsing for something. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and placed a hand delicately on her stomach. "We have some wonderful news," she said, her eyes shining as they darted to Miles. Miles grinned. "We're expecting," he said. I offered a polite smile. "Congratulations." But before I could even take another bite, Serena's expression shifted into something more calculating, with a baby on the way. "We've been thinking about the future," she continued. "This house is lovely, but for a growing family, we'll need more space, especially a nursery." She glanced at Miles, who nodded as if on cue. "So," she went on, her tones syrupy sweet, "we thought it might be time for you to enjoy some independence. Maybe move into your own place where you can have peace and quiet." I put my fork down slowly. "My own place." "Yes," Miles said. "She's right. Mom, it would make things easier for everyone." Serena leaned forward. "I actually have my old apartment in the city. I hardly use it anymore. I could rent it to you at a discount, $1,200 a month, way below market for that area." I sipped my water, letting the number settle. 1,200 was more than half my monthly pension. "That's generous," I said evenly, "considering I already have a place." She gave a small, practiced laugh. "Yes, but your room would be perfect for the nursery, and my mother could use the guest room to help with the baby. It's really the best solution for everyone." Miles looked at me. Waiting for my agreement, I smiled faintly, but said nothing. Inside, I could feel the slow, steady click of something locking into place, not in my house, but in my mind. By the time dessert was served, I knew exactly what my next move would be. 2 weeks after that dinner, I came home from the grocery store with a bag of fresh bread and oranges. As I stepped inside, I heard the muffled sound of cardboard flaps folding upstairs. The noise was coming from my bedroom. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the steps winding my jaw tighter. At the doorway, I stopped. Serena was standing at my dresser, wrapping a framed photograph of my parents in newspaper. 2 large boxes already sat on the floor, one filled with my books, the other with folded blankets from my closet. She turned toward me with a smile so sweet it nearly rotted the air. "Oh, hi, Clara. I thought I'd give you a head start. We've already decided it's better to get you settled sooner rather than later. Movers are coming Monday." I set the grocery bag down on the hall table. "We've already decided, yes," she said breezily. "Miles and I. This way you won't have to do the heavy lifting. It's really for your benefit." I stepped into the room, letting my eyes sweep over the boxes, the missing spaces on my shelves, the gap on the mantel where my mother's vase had been. "Serena," I said, "whose name is on the deed to this house?" Her smile wavered. "Well, technically, I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a file folder. From it, I removed the crisp, certified copy of the deed and held it up so she could see my name, printed in black and white." She stared, blinking. "I didn't realize." Miles appeared in the doorway, his voice cautious. "What's going on?" I handed him the paper. "Why don't you take a look?" His eyes scanned the page, and I watched the shift in his face, confusion giving way to understanding, and then to something else entirely. "This is your house," he said quietly. "It always has been," I replied. Serena's tone sharpened, the sweetness gone. "That doesn't change the fact that we need more space. We can work something out." "No," I said. "What's going to happen now is I'm going to decide who stays here, and I've already made up my mind." The morning after finding Serena in my room, I called Gwen Carter. She and I had gone to high school together, and after retiring from her work as a paralegal, she'd become my unofficial source for navigating legal knots. I told her everything, how Serena and the kids had moved in without any formal arrangement, how they'd tried to force me out, and how the deed had been sitting in my desk the whole time. Gwen listened quietly, then asked a few pointed questions. "Do they pay rent?" she said. "No," I answered. "Good," she replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "That means you have even more leverage. In this state, you can terminate a tenancy at will with 30 days' notice, if they're not paying. You can also sue for back rent fair market value for the time they've lived there without a lease." I grabbed a pen. What would that come to? Gwen had me check recent rental prices for a 4-bedroom in our area. The number made my stomach twist, not from fear, but from the sheer size of it. At market rate, Miles's 9 years in the house came to over $80,000. Serena's 6 months, just over $10,000. By the time I hung up, the knot in my chest had loosened. I printed out the official 30-day eviction notices on heavy paper, slid them into envelopes, and left them on the hall table until evening, when they came in from the backyard. I was waiting in the living room. "We need to talk," I said, motioning for them to sit. Serena crossed her arms. "If this is about yesterday, it's about today," I interrupted, handing each of them an envelope. "You have 30 days to vacate. All of you." Miles stared down at the paper, reading it twice before looking up at me. Serena's face went pale, then flushed red. "You can't be serious," she said. "I'm entirely serious. You've both been living here rent-free. That ends now." For the first time since Serena stepped into my home, the air in the room shifted. The advantage was mine, and they both knew it. The days after I served the eviction notices were like watching a storm roll in. Serena cycled through tactics, tears at breakfast, icy silence by lunch, and thinly veiled threats before dinner. One morning, she cornered me in the hallway, her voice trembling as she accused me of destroying a family before it's even begun. That afternoon, she slammed the front door so hard the frame rattled. 2 days later, a woman from Child Protective Services knocked on my door. She explained there had been a report of an unsafe environment for children. I invited her in, let her inspect every room, and handed her copies of the eviction paperwork. The visit was over in less than 20 minutes. As she left, she muttered, "This happens more often than you'd think." By evening, Miles was pacing the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck. "She swears she didn't call them," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured him a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "You sure that baby is yours, Miles?" His head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said lightly. "Just a question. You've known her how long? 7 months. People can surprise you." He stared at me, his jaw tightening. I could almost see the thoughts turning behind his eyes, doubt threading through the certainty he'd been clinging to. The rest of the evening passed in brittle quiet. Serena avoided me entirely, retreating to the guest room with her phone. Miles sat at the dining table long after the dishes were done, scrolling aimlessly, his coffee cold. By the next morning, I noticed a subtle shift. He was watching Serena more closely now, listening in a way he hadn't before. The storm outside my door wasn't over, but cracks had begun to form in the walls they'd built together. A week later, Miles came to me in the kitchen, his voice low. "I need to know for sure." I didn't ask what he meant. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept my address book and handed him the card for a private clinic in town. "They're discreet," I said. "Same-day results, if you're willing to pay for it." He took the card without another word. 2 days later, he came home pale, a folded envelope clenched in his hand. Serena was in the living room, flipping through a magazine. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. She laughed nervously. "What's this? Why don't you open it?" he said. Her eyes flicked from the envelope to his face, and something in her posture stiffened. She slid the paper out, scanned the first line, and froze. "Miles. It doesn't matter, it's not mine," he said flatly. "It's his, your ex-husband." Serena's mouth opened, but the excuses poured out too fast, tripping over each other. She claimed the lab made a mistake, that the timing was off, that love was more important than biology. But every word only seemed to push him further away. "I don't care what story you tell," he said finally. "I'm done." He turned and walked out, the front door clicking shut behind him. Serena stayed where she was for a long moment, the paper trembling in her hand. Then she looked at me, eyes blazing. "You ruined everything." I met her glare without blinking. "You did that yourself." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't answer. She just crumpled the paper in her fist and marched upstairs, the sound of her footsteps pounding against the hardwood like a retreating drumbeat. By nightfall, I could feel the change in the air. The fight wasn't mine anymore. It was hers to lose. Serena left the next morning without a word. No tearful speeches. No dramatic exit, just the thud of suitcase wheels down the steps and the slam of a car door. By evening, the house felt quieter, though not yet peaceful. Miles stayed a few more days. Drifting through the rooms like a man trying to memorize them, he didn't apologize. Not directly. We spoke in short sentences about logistics mail forwarding, storage, his new place, when he finally loaded the last box into his truck. He kept his eyes on the driveway. "I'll call you," he said. I nodded, knowing it wouldn't be soon. That night, I cooked dinner for one, just pasta with olive oil and garlic. Nothing fancy, but the kitchen was mine again, every drawer in its place, every spice where I left it. I ate at the table by the window, the sound of crickets filtering in through the open screen. As I rinsed the dishes, I let my gaze travel around the room. This house had been tested, just as I had, and I had held my ground. Keeping it wasn't about stubbornness or winning some unspoken contest. It was about refusing to be made a guest in my own life. I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The rooms were mine again. The silence, too, and for the first time in months. It felt like the walls were breathing with me instead of against me.